Glenn at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida reports on the continuing effort to recover the wreckage.
Sections of Challenger's cabin, nose, wing, and cargo bay door were brought to shore late last night, picked from the surface of the Atlantic. Coast Guard officials indicated the large fragments were in pretty good shape, heightening interest in what might be found when divers go down today to look at other large objects located by sonar on the sea bottom.
There is all kinds of debris on any ocean floor, so it's a little early to speculate on what it might be. It might be a Spanish galleon or something, but certainly it's in an area where a lot of debris has been found, and we definitely want to take a look at it.
The Coast Guard's James Simpson. National Transportation Safety Board crash experts have been brought in to help NASA analyze the wreckage to try to find a cause for the disaster. The work will be more difficult because range safety officers on the ground blew up the solid rocket booster shortly after the accident, suspect as the trigger of the main explosion. Meantime, no further word on the forensic examination of a bone fragment found on a beach. It was reported by local police to have shreds of blue fabric clinging to it, the color of the astronauts' flight clothing. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Around the nation, ceremonies to honor the dead explorers are scheduled for today. We have 3 reports, beginning with Jacqueline Adams at the White House.
President Reagan today will meet with the families of the 7 astronauts before leading the nation in a memorial service at the Johnson Space Center. Last night, in his first speech outside the White House since Tuesday's explosion, Mr. Reagan honored the Shuttle 7 as heroes.
We know now that God holds them close, and we pray he'll comfort their grieving loved ones.
In some closed societies, Mr. Reagan said, such a tragedy would be a fatal setback. But he recalled that after the 1967 launch pad fire, public support for the space program, quote, skyrocketed. Jacqueline Adams, CBS News, the White House.
This is Martha Teichner at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Today's memorial service will be short and very simple. President Reagan's address is scheduled to take only 5 minutes, the entire event a half hour. The 539th Air Force Band will begin and end the service. The final music will be America the Beautiful, and then, if heavy fog in the area lifts, there will be a flyby. 4 NASA training jets, the kind used as chase planes to guide the space shuttle in for a landing, will pass over in missing man formation. The service will take place on the same grassy lawn where in happier times NASA has welcomed its astronauts home. Martha Teichner, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
This is Rob Armstrong in Concord, New Hampshire. This picturesque New England city on the banks of the Merrimack will mourn today grief for Krista McAuliffe, a friend, neighbor, teacher, whose life was cut short when the shuttle Challenger exploded in a ball of flame. First, at the high school where she taught, there will be a small and intimate service. Later in the day, the entire community will hold a public memorial service, a chance for everyone to join in a collective demonstration of their sadness. At the end of that ceremony, the bells of the church where Krista McAuliffe worshipped will toll for 7 minutes. 1 minute for each of the Challenger crew members who will never come home again. Rob Armstrong, CBS News, Concord, New Hampshire.
Coming up on 8 minutes past the hour.
It's hard to believe it's really been only 3 days since the tragic accident with the Space Shuttle Challenger and the deaths of its 7 crew members, a nightmare from which we cannot awaken. Good morning. This is KTRH's coverage of the memorial service for the 7 Challenger astronauts. I'm Sue Davis at the Johnson Space Center with News Radio's Len Stiefel and Jim Domblin. We are waiting right now for the president to come out to speak to the people, thousands of people who have gathered together at the Johnson Space Center to honor the 7 astronauts. The ceremonies are being held in the open space in the middle of the Johnson Space Center, the open mall area. It's a very somber occasion. At the same time that New Hampshire school teacher Krista McAuliffe would have been conducting a lesson from outer space for America's school children, the nation is instead mourning her and her 6 crew members with this memorial service. The service is being attended by the family and friends and co-workers of the astronauts who died Tuesday morning in a tragic accident when Challenger exploded less than a minute and a half after its launch. Also the teachers who, along with Krista McAuliffe, applied to become the first teacher in space, they are also here. President and Mrs. Reagan have traveled to the Johnson Space Center, as you've been hearing this morning. We expect him to come out very soon. The president has expressed his grief over the tragedy, but has pledged the space program will continue, as that is the best way to honor the Challenger 7. We do expect the president to be coming out very shortly now. The sky has been sunny all morning. It's beginning to cloud up now, and sort of been fitting with this very somber occasion. There have been some 2,000 seats set up here in the mall area at the Johnson Space Center, and thousands more people are here. Everyone who works at the Johnson Space Center and all the contractors in the space shuttle program. This solemn occasion. In the background, you hear the 539th Air Force Band, the Air Force Band of the West, from Air Force Base in San Antonio. It could be weeks, months, more, maybe even years before we determine what caused that tragic accident. NASA workers at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida have been trying to pick up debris, trying to sift through that debris to find some clue, any clue that will tell them what caused the terrible accident. Speculation is focused on the solid rocket boosters and the external tank. We don't know, and we may never know. Reagan have just come out from the building, the NASA building, towards the crowd where they will be sitting. The crowd has stood up. President Reagan coming down very quickly from Washington for this service. It was set up very much at the last minute. Arrived at Johnson Space Center just a few moments ago. He will be speaking later on the program for about 5 minutes. Mrs. Reagan now greeting the families of the 7 astronauts who died on Tuesday.
While we have a moment, let's give you just a brief rundown of what the program calls for. The first speaker you will hear will be Dr. William Graham, the acting administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. We are then expecting to hear from the Reverend Bernard Hawley. He is the father of astronaut Steve Hawley, the father-in-law of astronaut Steve Hawley's wife, herself an astronaut, Sally Ride. Then Lieutenant Colonel Charles Bolden, Jr.,
members of the NASA family, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here today to honor 7 brave Americans, the crew of the spaceship Challenger. Dick Scobie, Mike Smith, Judy Resnick, Ron McNair, Al Onizuka, Greg Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe were explorers who blazed the trail for the rest of us. Their courage and dedication represents all that's best in each of us and in America. The Challenger crew took something of all of us aloft on Tuesday. Their dreams of discovery are our dreams. And the men and the women of that flight will always live in our thoughts and in our hearts. I pray that families and friends will remember our pride and our gratitude and find some refuge in its warmth. God bless them all.
That was Dr. William Graham, the acting administrator of NASA. Coming to the podium now is the Reverend Bernard Hawley, the father of an astronaut and the father-in-law of another astronaut, Sally Ride.
We are gathered here today as a family that shares a common dream, common goal, common commitment, and now a common tragic and devastating loss. And as families do, we have drawn together to remember with love and faith seven who embodied in a very special way that dream we all possess. Dick, Mike, Judy, Elle, Ron, Greg, Krista. Shall we pause for a moment of prayer and meditation? O thou, whom we call by various names, approach by several paths, and yet all acknowledge as the source of life. Thy greatness is seen in this vast and wondrous universe. We turn now to Thee because we need the assurance of a love equally great and wondrous. To feel that underneath are the everlasting arms, and to know that the hand that holds us is a hand we trust. We come here grateful for the many ways we have known those whom today we mourn as husband, wife, father, mother, daughter, son, colleague, neighbor, and friend. Each brings his or her own memories of love and laughter, of strength and tenderness, enthusiasm and joy, skill and courage. And we are grateful for the privilege of having known them, having our lives touched by their lives, being bound by ties of love and caring. And now we pray for those who most keenly feel this loss. May they as surely feel the love that surrounds them, the caring that reaches out to them. May we be bearers of thy spirit of love, so that together we may know not only grief, but also the grandeur and the grace of life. Amen.
As Reverend Bernard Hawley spoke, there were thousands of bowed heads here in the courtyard at the Johnson Space Center as he offered a prayer and offered the wish that the memories of the shuttle crew would never die. Now approaching the podium, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Bolden, a NASA astronaut.
A reading for hope and strength from the 46 Psalms. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her right early. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has wrought desolations in the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still. Know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge.
Once again, that was Lieutenant Colonel Charles Bolden of the United States Marine Corps, himself a NASA astronaut, and now President Reagan approaching the podium to deliver his eulogy.
We come together today to mourn the loss of 7 brave Americans, to share the grief that we all feel, and perhaps in that sharing to find the strength to bear our sorrow and the courage to look for the seeds of hope. Our nation's loss is first a profound personal loss to the family, and the friends and the loved ones of our shuttle astronauts. To those they left behind, the mothers, the fathers, the husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, yes, and especially the children. All of America stands beside you in your time of sorrow. What we say today is only an inadequate expression of what we carry in our hearts. Words pale in the shadow of grief. They seem insufficient even to measure the brave sacrifice of those you loved and we so admired. Their truest testimony will not be in the words we speak, but in the way they led their lives and in the way they lost their lives, with dedication, honor, and an unquenchable desire to explore this mysterious and beautiful universe. The best we can do is remember our 7 astronauts, our Challenger 7. Remember them as they lived, bringing life and love and joy to those who knew them, and pride to a nation. They came from all parts of this great country, from South Carolina to Washington State, Ohio to Mohawk, New York, Hawaii to North Carolina, to Concord, New Hampshire. They were so different, yet in their mission, their quest, they held so much in common. We remember Dick Scobie, the commander who spoke the last words we heard from the Space Shuttle Challenger. He served as a fighter pilot in Vietnam, earning many medals for bravery. Later as a test pilot of advanced aircraft before joining the space program. Danger was a familiar companion to Commander Scobie. We remember Michael Smith, who earned enough medals as a combat pilot to cover his chest, including the Navy Distinguished Flying Cross, 3 air medals, and the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry with Silver Star, in gratitude from a nation he fought to keep free. We remember Judith Resnick, known as JR to her friends, always smiling, always eager to make a contribution, finding beauty in the music she played on her piano in her off hours. We remember Ellison Onizuka, who was a child running barefoot through the coffee fields and macadamia groves of Hawaii, dreamed of someday traveling to the moon. Being an Eagle Scout, he said, had helped him soar to the impressive achievements of his career. We remember Ronald McNair, who said that he learned perseverance in the cotton fields of South Carolina. His dream was to live aboard the space station, performing experiments, and playing his saxophone in the weightlessness of space. Oh, Ron, we will miss your saxophone, and we will build your space station. We remember Gregory Jarvis. On that ill-fated flight, he was carrying with him a flag of his university in Buffalo, New York. A small token, he said, to the people who unlocked his future. We remember Krista McAuliffe, who captured the imagination of the entire nation, inspiring us with her pluck, her restless spirit of discovery, a teacher not just to her students, but to an entire people, instilling us all with the excitement of this journey we ride into the future. We will always remember them, these skilled professionals, scientists and adventurers, these artists and teachers and family men and women, and we will cherish each of their stories. Stories of triumph and bravery, stories of true American heroes. On the day of the disaster, our nation held a vigil by our television sets. In one cruel moment, our exhilaration turned to horror. We waited and watched and tried to make sense of what we had seen. That night, I listened to a call-in program on the radio. People of every age spoke of their sadness and the pride they felt in our astronauts. Across America, we are reaching out, holding hands, and finding comfort in one another. The sacrifice of your loved ones has stirred the soul of our nation. And through the pain, our hearts have been open to a profound truth. The future is not free. The story of all human progress is one of a struggle against all odds. We learned again that this America, which Abraham Lincoln called the last best hope of man on earth, was built on heroism and noble sacrifice. It was built by men and women like our 7-star Voyagers, who answered a call beyond duty, who gave more than was expected or required, and who gave it little thought of worldly reward. We think back to the pioneers of an earlier century, the sturdy souls who took their families and their belongings and set out into the frontier of the American West. Often they met with terrible hardship. Along the Oregon Trail, you can still see the grave markers of those who fell on the way. But grief only steeled them to the journey ahead. Today, the frontier is space and the boundaries of human knowledge. Sometimes when we reach for the stars, we fall short. But we must pick ourselves up again and press on, despite the pain. Our nation is indeed fortunate that we can still draw on immense reservoirs of courage, character, and fortitude. But we're still blessed with heroes like those of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Dick Scobie knew that every launching of a space shuttle is a technological miracle. And he said, if something ever does go wrong, I hope that doesn't mean the end to the Space Shuttle program. Every family member I talked to asked specifically that we continue the program, that is what their departed loved one would want above all else. We will not disappoint them. Today we promise Dick Scobie and his crew that their dream lives on, that the future they worked so hard to build man will continue his conquest of space, to reach out for new goals and ever greater achievements. That is the way we shall commemorate our 7 Challenger heroes. Dick, Mike, Judy, Elle, Ron, Greg, and Krista. Your families and your country mourn your passing. We bid you goodbye. We will never forget you. For those who knew you well and loved you, the pain will be deep and enduring. The nation, too, will long feel the loss of her 7 sons and daughters, her 7 good friends. We can find consolation only in faith, for we know in our hearts that you who flew so high and so proud now make your home beyond the stars, safe in God's promise of eternal life. May God bless you all and give you comfort in this difficult time.
As the president spoke, many people in the audience were wiping at their eyes, dabbing at the tears that filled them. And now the audience will be asked to sing along to America the Beautiful. As the president finished his remarks, one could hear in the background church bells tolling the noon hour here in Houston. The president made clear that this is very much a national service, a national memorial service, that this goes far beyond just the NASA space family.
We are expecting a flyby with NASA T-38s in the missing man formation to conclude this ceremony.
As this Air Force Band of the West plays the solemn funereal music, many members of the NASA family here continue to wipe tears from their eyes. It was a very moving speech by the president, as he said that the nation will always remember the Challenger crew, and he assured them that the best testament this nation can give to them is to continue the space program. He said every family member of the shuttle crew with whom he spoke asked that the shuttle program and the space program not be discontinued. Brisk wind blows here in the courtyard.
Will you please rise and join in the singing of America the Beautiful?
NASA employees and other mourners on their feet, singing America the Beautiful as this memorial service draws to a close. Any moment now, we should be hearing the roar of T-38 jets flying overhead in a missing man formation. The pilots of this jet tribute to the shuttle crew are at Johnson Space Center. Here they are. T-38 jet pilots, piloted by 4 Johnson Space Center research pilots, flew overhead in a missing man formation, a tribute by NASA to the shuttle crew that perished on Tuesday morning, and the final item of this memorial service. As the Air Force Band of the West plays God Bless America, NASA employees on their feet here, standing in silence as this memorial service comes to a close.
And in the front row, the families, the grief-stricken families, being greeted by the President, bidding farewell to the families. The youngest children in the front row were the children of Mission Specialist Ronald McNair, 3-year-old Reggie McNair, 1-year-old Joy McNair, sitting in the front row, and really quite apparent from watching them that they are not old enough to really understand what has happened. McNair's 3-year-old son, Reggie, obviously, though, when President Reagan mentioned his father by name, very, very proud. A large grin came to his face at that point.
Bob, clearly many of these NASA employees were very moved by this memorial service, and it is a national state funeral for the crew of the Challenger. So far as we know, there are no bodies to bury, and this service does give an outlet for the grief felt, as the President said, by the entire nation for what happened to the shuttle crew.
The President now greeting members of the family of Mission Specialist Ellison Onizuka. Embracing many of the family members as he moves down the line. The First Lady following behind him, again embracing many of the family members, shaking hands. Now the President paying respects to the wife of Mission Specialist Ronald McNair. And the
Bob,
children.
this is perhaps an all too familiar function for the President to perform. American heroes, as he says, died in the course of performing their duty. Not too long ago, he was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where the men and women of the armed forces who perished in the Gander, Newfoundland plane crash, the families were gathered in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and the President went there to pay tribute to those dead. He has done this on many occasions. After the Marine barracks were bombed in Lebanon, the President going to Camp Lejeune in order to pay tribute to the dead and commiserate with the families over their grievous loss. So this is a familiar, perhaps all too familiar function for the President and the First Lady to perform. The President obviously moved as he spoke, saying that how this nation will never forget those who perished on Tuesday in the Shuttle Challenger explosion.
The President and the First Lady have made their way down the line now. Now they are greeting some others in some of the rows behind the front row.
as the president pays bids farewell to the families of the crew who died in the shuttle disaster. All the other people here at this memorial service, thousands of them, NASA employees, dignitaries, are on their feet. Many of them still very moved, clutching at one another, looking for emotional support in this very difficult hour.
Clearly shaken by what he has just had to do in consoling the families as he now returns to Building 16 here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, hand in hand with the First Lady. So President Reagan paying tribute to what he referred to as 7 brave Americans who brought pride to a nation, and the president vowing that their wish, their stated wish, that the space program continue will be carried out. President promising their dream lives on. With Mark Knoller here at the Johnson Space Center, Dick Uliano at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and Warren Levinson in New Hampshire, I'm Bob Moon, and this has been a live special report from AP Network News, the shuttle explosion, America grieves together. This is the AP Radio Network.
CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards. President Reagan led the nation in mourning the astronauts killed in the space shuttle explosion. 7 brave Americans, he called them, at a memorial service at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Many of their relatives, friends, and co-workers attended the ceremony. The president told them the country will commemorate the astronauts by continuing the conquest of space.
Today we promise Dick Scobie and his crew that their dream lives on, that the future they worked so hard to build will become reality. The dedicated men and women of NASA have lost 7 members of their family. Still, they too must forge ahead with a space program that is effective, safe, and efficient, but bold and committed.
One of the Challenger astronauts was remembered in her native New Hampshire. Rob Armstrong reports.
The students at Concord High, where Krista McAuliffe taught, are wrapping up their very private memorial service right now, and CBS News has obtained a copy of the letter President Reagan wrote to them. As you move forward from this day, wrote the president, as its clouds and shadows give way to fresh sunlight, you will ponder many times how best to honor the memory of your friend. You could hardly do better than to believe, as she believed, that the average citizen has the power to change the course of human events for the good. School Superintendent Mark Beauvais.
His words are comforting. His words show an awareness of Krista as a teacher, as a mother, as a human being, as a person who is involved in the space program.
Later today, Concord, New Hampshire will say its public farewell to Krista McAuliffe and the other 6 Americans who died aboard Challenger. Rob Armstrong, CBS News, Concord.
More CBS News in 1 minute. This is The World Tonight, sponsored in part by the Wall Street Journal. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
Dick Scobie, Mike Smith, Judy Resnick, Ron McNair, Al Onizuka, Greg Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe were explorers who blazed the trail for the rest of us. Their courage and dedication represents all that's best in each of us and in America.
Their faces were streaked with tears, their eyes heavy with sorrow. They were gathered 15,000 strong at the Johnson Space Center to pay final homage to the dead of the Challenger space shuttle. Family, friends, space workers gathered together with the President of the United States, representing a grieving nation. Gary Schuster was among them.
In a brief but moving memorial ceremony, President Reagan told the families and colleagues of the 7 Challenger astronauts that their deaths last Tuesday sadly reminded Americans that pioneering carries a price.
Today we promise Dick Scobie and his crew that their dream lives on, that the future they worked so hard to build will become reality. The dedicated men and women of NASA have lost 7 members of their family. Still, they too must forge ahead with a space program that is effective, safe, and efficient, but bold and committed.
Prior to the ceremony, the President and Mrs. Reagan met privately with 25 members of the astronauts' families. Mr. Reagan then eulogized each astronaut with a personal note. He spoke of Ron McNair's dream to live and play his saxophone aboard a space station. Mr. Reagan promised the United States will build that space station. The President concluded his remarks by saying that sometimes we fall short when reaching for the stars. But despite the pain, he told his listeners, some of whom wiped away tears, we must pick ourselves up again and press on. That's what the Challenger 7 crew would do, he said, and we will not disappoint them. Gary Schuster, CBS News, with the presidential party at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Then it was time for the final traditional salute to those who make the sky their home. The fly packs, the formation that is known as the missing man. As the planes bid their last farewell to fallen comrades, the investigation into the disaster continued. Christopher Glenn reports.
Recovery and review were the day's prime activities. Search teams picked up at least 2 more boatloads of floating debris, while others clustered around a spot where sonar indicated a very large metal object in 140 feet of water.
We haven't sent down divers because apparently the conditions up there right now are not very ideal for diving and looking for debris in those current conditions such as they are in that location.
Instead, says NASA's George Diller, they used an unmanned, camera-equipped mini-sub to examine the object. No results of the probe have been announced. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Reports tell of a pending east-west spy swap. NASA nears a tentative verdict on the Challenger disaster. Marcos Foaquino levels new campaign charges in the Philippines. Good morning, Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. Services today for 3 of the Challenger astronauts. The space agency will continue piecing together the increasingly strong clues into the cause of last Tuesday's disaster. Peter Van Sant has the latest from the Kennedy Space Center.
NASA investigators today will try to figure out why flames from Challenger's right solid rocket booster burst through the side of its metal casing, striking and apparently igniting the giant fuel tank. NASA film released over the weekend clearly shows a disastrous second flame just above the exhaust cone. About 15 seconds after the burn-through occurred, Challenger exploded. NASA officials say the crew never received any warning. A spokesman for the company that manufactures the fuel for the solid rockets, Gil Moore, says NASA's pictures don't reveal the cause of the rocket failure.
It's not clear yet. It's one link in a chain. We don't know whether it's the beginning link of the chain or the middle or the end.
Meanwhile, 3 robot mini-submarines will be scouring the ocean floor today near the launch site looking for sunken shuttle debris. There had been some speculation that the remains of Challenger's crew compartment had been located, but poor visibility has hampered identifying the object. Peter Van Sant, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
The time, 3.5 minutes past the hour.
This is The World Tonight, sponsored in part by the Wall Street Journal. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
It's been almost a week since our nation and family stood together as we watched Challenger slip beyond our grasp. The memories of that moment will be with us always, as will the memories of those brave Americans who were aboard. It's time now to assemble a group of distinguished Americans to take a hard look at the accident, to make a calm and deliberate assessment of the facts and ways to avoid repetition. So I am today announcing the formation of a presidential commission on the Space Shuttle Challenger's accident.
The memorial services continued today as President Reagan made that announcement. Among those services, a private mass in Concord, New Hampshire for Krista McAuliffe. And as the bells mourned, the nation turns to the future to make sure such a terrible thing does not happen again. Mariah McLaughlin begins our report.
Former Secretary of State William Rogers will head the investigative commission. Others among the 12 members, former astronaut Neil Armstrong, test pilot Chuck Yeager, and the first American woman in space, Sally Ride. Chairman Rogers said the investigation will be complete.
It's vital that the American people have confidence in the credibility of the commission. I don't anticipate, once we get started, that there'll be a question about our impartiality or our willingness to follow any path, no matter where it leads.
White House spokesman Larry Speaks rejected suggestions that an outside presidential commission showed a lack of faith in NASA.
This will give the American people the opportunity to know that an outside group of experts, distinguished Americans who have no axe to grind either way, have come in to review the findings of NASA and to request additional data and report to him.
The commission will report back to the president in 120 days. Mariah McLaughlin, CBS News, the White House.
This is Bruce Hall at the Kennedy Space Center. NASA investigators are increasingly confident that last week's explosion was caused by burning, leaking fuel. And they are now turning their attention to finding out the reason for the leak in the right solid rocket booster. Theories under investigation include a faulty seam, metal fatigue in booster parts that were used on earlier shuttle missions, and fuel that did not bond properly in the freezing temperatures at the Kennedy Space Center. 3 robot submarines are now searching the ocean floor, looking for parts of Challenger's crew compartment and sections of the crucial right solid rocket booster that may have caused the accident. Sources now believe that a portion of the booster rocket may have survived the original explosion and an Air Force attempt to destroy the boosters when one headed toward a populated area. The rocket booster would be crucial to the accident investigation. Bruce Hall, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
This is Charles Osgood. Members of the Space Shuttle Commission go to the White House today to present their report on the Challenger accident. Public disclosure of the details won't come until after that ceremonial presentation. But Commission sources have already said the report will point to many technical faults on the shuttle, as well as many problems with NASA's decision-making process. The space agency is expected to be advised to make more use of contractor and astronaut expertise in the future when deciding whether or not to launch. Former U.S. Senator Harrison Schmitt, who as an astronaut flew to the moon on Apollo 17, sees the Challenger accident as just a temporary setback in the conquest of space.
Over the long haul, the nation must have a very active, much more active space program than we even have today. NASA will have to work its way through this time. The country will have to work its way through this time. And I think the Commission report, in spite of a rocky start, is a major contribution to that effort to get things right again.
More news in a minute.
If anyone at any time in any
From ABC News, I'm Kate Dorden. What President Reagan called their painful duty finally at an end, members of the Rogers Commission presented their findings today on the explosion of the shuttle Challenger. Chairman William Rogers said the commission knew the gravity but not the difficulty of its task at the outset. And President Reagan promised to go on from here.
We'll simply do what has to be done to make our space program safe and reliable and a renewed source of pride to our nation.
This is Vic Ratner.
The commission does not call for anyone at NASA to be fired, but the report does indict the way the space agency does business, calling the safety program ineffective, demanding a massive shakeup in NASA management, and the creation of a new top-to-bottom safety system. The report also leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Among other things, it does not endorse NASA's request for immediate construction of a replacement shuttle, perhaps because the White House has not decided how to pay for one. And the report does not estimate how fast NASA should be able to get the shuttles flying again. Vic Ratner, ABC News, Washington.
NASA already has begun changing some personnel and procedures. I'll have more after this.
Clock.
CBS News, this is Doug Poling. The long-awaited Rogers Commission report is out. It says the January 28th accident that killed 7 astronauts and destroyed the Space Shuttle Challenger had a single cause, the failure of a seal in a shuttle booster rocket. The report faults the space agency for concealing problems from top launch managers.
This is Gary Schuster at the White House. William Rogers, the chairman of the commission investigating the Challenger shuttle disaster, said while there always will be an element of risk in space flight, he hopes the 250-page report issued today will help produce safer space missions.
Safety should be the predominant consideration. And it would be, we think, a mistake to, anxiety to get moving again into space that we move too soon.
Commission Vice Chairman and former astronaut Neil Armstrong said he feels that next summer's target date for the resumption of space flight is reasonable, but quickly added that NASA should not hold itself firmly to that date. Rogers said the commission accomplished what it set out to do. It established beyond any doubt what caused, in his words, the national tragedy, and it made recommendations how the space program could be better managed. Gary Schuster, CBS News, the White House.
Robert Shackney reports.
The Rogers Commission report sharply criticizes officials at NASA's Marshall Rocket Center in Alabama for a series of major failings. For failing to recognize design of the shuttle rocket was bad, then failing to fix the problem, and finally deciding to treat it as an acceptable flight risk. The commission says cold contributed to the disaster, that the rocket seal got in trouble at temperatures below 65 degrees. Chairman William Rogers says he's pleased there already has been a shakeup at NASA's Marshall Center, but he said it was unfair to single out individuals for blame.
In a sense, this is a kind of a national tragedy that a lot of us are to blame for. The administration, Congress, the press, all of us were too optimistic, too willing to accept the fact that this was operational.
NASA's administrator says he's pleased to accept the Rogers Commission report, but he says it's too early to say what the agency will do about the Commission's recommendations. Robert Shackney, CBS News, Washington.
Finland reports abnormal new radiation readings. South African government pushes tough new security laws. Congress takes up the critical Challenger report. Good morning, Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. The Blue-ribbon Challenger investigation today briefs 2 congressional space panels on the commission's findings and recommendations. The report, released yesterday, blames NASA management for ignoring warnings about the ultimately fatal rocket seal. It's 4 minutes past the hour.
CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney. Forget about any space shuttle flights before 1988. NASA Administrator James Fletcher delivered that message to President Reagan when he went to the White House with a progress report on how the space agency is complying with the recommendations of the Rogers Commission on the Challenger accident. Later, Fletcher told reporters that NASA needs time to thoroughly test design changes.
We felt in view of the large visibility of the accident
when we start flying again, we want to make sure that it really is safe. And it was that high priority of safety, I think, as much as anything else, that caused the date to slip.
NASA officials had talked about being able to resume shuttle flights next July. More news in a minute.